Hey, Restore, this is Pastor Ryan, and we are in week 2 of our Last Judge series, talking about the life of Samuel. Last week, David killed it. I'm serious. If you missed the message from David on kind of the early life of Samuel, kind of what brought him to where he kind of is at in life now, I really want you to go listen to that. It's our Facebook page, but it is also going to be on our YouTube page. It's a way for you to connect with what past messages here at Restore. This week we're jumping ahead to 1 Samuel 7. Now, I don't know about you, but one of my favorite people in Scripture is Samuel. I love Samuel because I feel like, he has such an auspicious start with his family, just kind of how his mother pleaded for his life, pleaded for him to be born, and then came to where he is at now, right? And Samuel, even from the beginning, as a young man, has had the courage from God to deliver hard messages and hard things. And that's what I really love about Samuel. We're going to jump into 1 Samuel chapter 7 today. So the men of Kiriath-Jearim came to get the ark of the Lord. They took it to the hillside home of Abinadab and ordained Eleazar, his son, to be in charge of it. The ark remained in Kiriath-Jearim for a long time, 20 years in all. During that time, all Israel mourned because it seemed the Lord had abandoned them. Then Samuel said to all the people of Israel, "If you want to return to the Lord with all your hearts, get rid of your foreign gods and your images of Asheroth. Turn your hearts to the Lord and obey him alone. Then he will rescue you from the Philistines." So the Israelites got rid of their images of Baal and Asheroth and worshipped only the Lord. Then Samuel told them, "Gather all of Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you." So they gathered at Mizpah, and in a great ceremony drew water from a well and poured it out before the Lord. They also went without food all day and confessed that they had sinned against the Lord. It was at Mizpah that Samuel became Israel's judge. When the Philistine rulers heard that Israel had gathered at Mizpah, they mobilized their army and advanced. The Israelites were badly frightened, and when they learned that the Philistines were approaching, "Don't stop pleading with the Lord our God to save you from the Philistines," they begged Samuel. So Samuel took a young lamb and offered it to the Lord as a whole burnt offering. He pleaded with the Lord to help Israel, and the Lord answered him. Just as Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines arrived to attack Israel. But the Lord spoke the mighty voice of thunder from heaven that day. And the Philistines were thrown into such a confusion that the Israelites defeated them. The men of Israel chased them from Mizpah to a place called Beth-kar, slaughtering them all along the way. Samuel took a large stone, placed it between the towns of Mizpah and Jeshneah. He named it Ebenezer, which means the stone of help. For he said, "Up to this point, the Lord has helped us." So the Philistines were subdued and didn't invade Israel again for some time. And throughout Samuel's lifetime, the Lord's powerful hand was raised against the Philistines. The Israelites' villages near Akron and Gath and the Philistines had captured were restored to Israel, along with the rest of the territory that the Philistines had taken. And there was peace between Israel and the Amorites in those days. Samuel continued as Israel's judge for the rest of his life. Each year he traveled around, setting up his court, first at Bethel, then at Gilgal, and then at Mizpah. He judged the people of Israel at each of these places. Then he would return to his home in Ramah, and he would hear cases there too. And Samuel built an altar to the Lord at Ramah. What happens in our lives? I think our lives really intersect well with this story here in 1 Samuel 7. And as I read this passage over and over, trying to get ready for our message today, I printed out the passage and I read it through once, and I highlighted all the things that stuck out to me. I read it through a second time, and I started making notes on the sides of the paper, and I pulled out my journal and I started making notes on the paper there. And as I would read through it, as I came through this passage, I just continued to find things that God was kind of bringing out into my heart and mind. So when I was a young kid, young man, I always knew that I was going to do something in ministry. Right from a young age, I felt the pull and the call of God on my heart to do something. I didn't know exactly what it would be, and I didn't know exactly what God would do in those moments, but I always felt like God was really pulling me towards himself, towards ministry, towards the ministry education. And so I really took hold of this probably about my junior year of high school, where God was really drawing me into those moments. And I started preparing, and I started looking at colleges and places to go to school. And I've shared this story with you, and I ended up going to a small Bible college in southern Iowa called Vennard, and it was there that I knew that God had called me to this place. It wasn't like God had said, I want you to go to a Bible college. It was God had called me to this school. And so in preparing for this, I applied, got in, went down to school there and had my first semester, and it was awesome. It was fantastic. I didn't always get the greatest grades my first year there, but I kind of stuck with it, and I leaving my first semester, there was some ups and some downs, right? Some good days and some bad. But I really felt like this is where God had me. I really felt like this was the place. I was on break following my first semester at Vennard. And as I was on break, home, I was in Minnesota on a dairy farm. It was winter, cold. I received a call from someone at the school, and they let me know that I wasn't going to be able to return to school for the spring semester. And I remember in that moment, as I got that call, as I'm on the phone, listening to the words that faculty member was saying, it felt as if everything God had called me to had stopped. I felt as if all the prepping, all the time leading up to that moment had been taken away from me. See, as I hung up the phone, I knew that this was a place God, and this was not just a place, this was the place God had called me to go to school and to prepare. But now what was I going to do? I remember after the call, I immediately went outside. I remember putting on my jacket and boots, grabbing a hat and gloves, going outside. And we lived on a dairy farm, and my parents' house is kind of on one side of the farm. And then I had to walk past my grandmother's house and my aunt and uncle's house, the barn. And as I went around the back of the barn, it turned, and there's some trees on this side, and on my right side there's some sheds and grain bins. And I walked out the back of the field, towards the fields. Now, if you've ever taken time to go outside, like outside of the city, the first thing you always notice is how bright the stars actually are. And as I went around the corner, heading towards the field, I remember looking up, and the stars were like as bright as they'd ever been. The moon was just beaming with light to the point where I didn't even need a flashlight that night. And I kept walking, and I got about halfway down the road, out into the middle of the field, no one around me. Dark as dark. I stopped. And I can remember it as clear as day. I had hot tears pouring down my face. So much hurt, so much anger in that moment. Everything God had called me to do was being taken away. The place, not just a place, the place I knew God had called me to go to was gone. And I remember stopping. I looked up, and I remember screaming, "Are you kidding me? Really? Are you kidding me?" And I stood there. I felt so alone in that moment. See, I felt as if God had abandoned me, had abandoned the plan that He had for me, the plan that we had. Had He abandoned me? Now what? Really, God? Really? And God said nothing. It was radio silence. What did the people of Israel do? In the first three verses, we see the response of Israel. We see this response because it's the first couple of times I read this passage, the first two verses were almost a throwaway for me. I didn't even understand it in all of its glory. But as you read the story, the first two verses have set the stage for what has happened. See, the ark of the Lord has been taken from them, placed in a foreign area, placed somewhere else, and is gone for some 20 years. And understandably, in this moment, the people of Israel started to mourn because the ark of the Lord that held his spirit is gone from them. And understandably, they felt abandoned. They felt like, where's God? And so in that moment, in their moment of feeling abandoned and mourning the loss of the Spirit of God, of the presence of God, in their mourning, they could have chosen to lean deeper into God. They could have chosen to call on Samuel, to call on the Lord, and lean deeper into who he is. Yet that's not what they do. What they do is, in verses 3 and 4, we see what happens. See, Samuel comes to them and says, listen, if you want God to come back to you, if you want God to come back and bring his presence here again, if you want the forgiveness for your abandonment of him, you need to get rid of, you need to lose the idols and the false gods in your midst. See what has happened when they felt like God had abandoned them, they went and found other gods. See, they let their mourning, the mourning of this feeling of abandonment, to turn into the physical idols that they could have close to them in those moments. They have replaced God, the great I am, with foreign gods and false images and Baal and Asheroth. But here comes Samuel, and he says that I have something from God for you. This isn't going to be easy, right? He says, I want you to turn away from the gods that have enslaved you. These small g gods, these fake, these false idols. Turn away from them. Toss them out. Get rid of them. Remove them. And turn back to God and obey him alone. So it is asking them, he says, I want you to turn to him, call out to him, and obey him. I want you to reclaim the prayer to God, follow and obey him, tossing these things out. See, Henry Nouwen shared this. Prayer is an act by which we divest ourselves of false belongings and become free to belong to God and God alone. Prayer, calling out to God, hearing his voice, digging deep into God, helps us to get rid of the false things that have came into our lives. But in doing that, it frees us to belong to God and God alone. See, that is what they've lost. That is what the people of Israel have lost when they felt abandoned and wandered from God. So the question that I have wrestled with at different times of my life is, what do we do when God is silent? When God is silent, we can move deeper towards God, or we can find comfort in the false things of this world. I remember in those weeks after I found out I wasn't going back to the college that God had called me to. That night, as I screamed at God, as I yelled at him, as I called out to him, really? There was nothing. I had hoped that God would give me the answers that my heart desired. I had hoped he would answer the why. Why did this happen? Why does it feel as if you have abandoned me and you are no longer here? Silence. So rather than wait on God and trusting him that he was there, that he had my best interest, I started to apply at other schools. I started to apply at other colleges, Bible colleges, to get in, because if God was going to block me and not allow me to go back there, if God was going to abandon me and not tell me what is going on, what the plan here is, then I was going to help God do his thing. That he needed me to act in his place. See, this was going to be the victory that I would help God, because he was silent at my request. And I started a new job at a grocery store, and I liked it. It was good. It was something that I enjoyed. And in all of this, of the new job, of applying to other colleges to get my pastoral degree, God was silent. And I stopped pursuing him. I stopped going after what he had called me to. The question for you is, what do you do when you're there? When it feels as if God has become silent in your life, I'm sure that if you took a moment to stop and think about it, there's been moments when you felt God has been silent, when you felt abandoned, and unfortunately, our human response is to find something that's near to us that feels comfortable. In a marriage, if someone may feel abandoned or like they are not hearing from their spouse, the typical answer is to withdraw and draw towards someone else, to find someone else, to find something else to provide comfort. So we are faced with a problem. We are faced with this issue of, do we pursue God even though we may not be hearing from him, even though we feel abandoned? Do we pursue him? Do we dig deeper in our pain and suffering, in the moments when we are hurting deeply? See, I thought that God needed my help. I thought that God needed me to do what he wasn't doing. But what God needed from me in that moment was to trust him. Even when things were silent, God needed me to just be present and trust him. There was so much pain in that silence. I wanted his answer now, and I wanted him to tell me what he was doing right now. Gemma Ryan says this: pain and suffering have the capacity to deepen and transform you, but they also have the capacity to destroy you. And I was letting that pain and suffering, that pain and sorrow, I was allowing it to take root and not transform me, but to destroy me and allow me to go anywhere else but where God was at. See, the people of Israel were hurt, their wounds were deep, and God felt silent. They decided to follow after their own gods. They decided to follow after the gods of people that were in their community. But Samuel does what he does best, right? He hears from God, and Samuel comes out and calls out to God for them on their behalf. See, we saw last week that even in the youth of Samuel, he still has the courage to press into God and to hear from God and to provide an answer, to provide a story that isn't always easy. See, in the face of their own sin, in the face of their own moment, the people of Israel now confess. They toss out these fake gods that they've been clinging to for support and love. Samuel calls out. Samuel intercedes on their behalf. See, this is not something that they deal with as individuals. Samuel doesn't say, all right, each individually, I want you to go out and pray. Find a small retreat spot on your own and go do your thing. See, this is a corporate collective sin they're going to deal with. And in this amazing moment of the following verses of this chapter, they go to Mizpah and they confess and they fast and they call out to God in unison as a community. But it starts with Samuel interceding on their behalf. See, it shares in this passage, and he pleaded with the Lord to help, and the Lord answered him. See, Tyler Stanton says, God doesn't need intercessors. God chooses intercessors. God doesn't need you to intercede on someone else's behalf. He chooses you. See, he chooses you. He chose Samuel to intercede on the behalf of those who are far from God. God chooses Samuel to intercede on behalf of Israel. Intercessors step into the gap for those who might not even know they need it. Where was God when I needed him? Where was God when I received that call telling me I could not go back to school? At times, as a Christian, I feel like I can't ask God questions, right? At times we feel like I just have to basically take it. God, I'm going through something, and rather than asking questions, I just have to kind of sit there and take it. I can't push back. I can't ask where he's at. I can't ask what's going on. I can't ask that I need him. Where are you at? Where was God when Joseph was sold into slavery? Where was God when David was running for his life? Where was God when Jesus was hanging on the cross? Where was God when Samson had his eyes plucked out and his head shaved and he was crushing grain for the Philistines in the Philistine camp? Where was God when the community of Israel was in bondage of slavery? Where was God? Where was God when life is hard and difficult and it feels like we're all alone? Where was God when you lost your mother and your father? Where was God when you were being beaten and abused by a family member when you were a child? Where was God when you cried out to him, tears flowing down your face, just wanting to be near to God? Where was God when you begged him to bring your best friend back from the dead? Where was God in your lowest moments when you needed him so deeply? Where was God when I cried out to him in that cold Minnesota winter night? Where was God while I was begging him for 4 years to answer our prayers for a baby? Where was God? Difficult circumstances do not erase the presence of God, but it is the presence of God that enables you to get through those difficult circumstances. Where was God when you felt abandoned? Genesis 39:2 says, and the Lord was with Joseph. God wanted desperately for the people of Israel to continue to call out to him, and they did not. They let their fear of their circumstances push them further from God. And the Lord was with Joseph. And if he was with Joseph, he can be with you. Allow the presence of God to get you through these circumstances. Pray, plead with God through the victory. Later that year, I received calls from a couple of the schools I had applied to, telling me that they didn't have space. They didn't want to bring me on for the next semester. I was broken. And I started to turn back to God, calling out to Him. And the Lord was with me. I received a call not too much later that next summer that the school the school that I had applied, I'd originally been going to was what I could come back for the fall semester. And not only that, but God provided a job on campus for me to help pay for my schooling. Where was God? He was there the whole time. See, some of you are Samuels. Some of you live the life of Samuel, interceding on the behalf of others, interceding on behalf of our community. But deeper than that, I believe God wants to raise up an army of Samuels to intercede on behalf of our community. See, at Restore, we are the church for the rest of us. And unfortunately, if we are not careful, we will become the church for us. If we stop acting and living like a Samuel and interceding on the behalf of others, if we stop pleading for the victory in those around us, even when they cannot see it, we will become ingrown and become the church for us. So I believe there are also people in our community at Restore that are living the life of Israel, that maybe once we trusted God, but now we feel as if He's abandoned us and we've kind of decided to trust everything else but God. I believe that there are people, the rest of us in our community, that are just waiting for somebody to intercede on their behalf, and they don't even know it. So I believe that God is calling you and me to become like Samuel, pushing into who God is, even in the moments we feel like we've been abandoned. Even when we don't feel as if God is present. But here's the deal. You can't let your feelings be on the throne of your heart. Because if you let your feelings rule your heart, you are in trouble. Your feelings are real, but they do not always tell you the truth. I want to tell you today, if you feel abandoned by God, if you feel far from Him, if you haven't heard His voice or His presence in a while, press into who God is. Allow God and His presence to get you through those circumstances today. God is calling up Samuels. Will you answer? God is calling out to people that have felt abandoned and felt as if God isn't hearing them anymore, and He's calling out to you today saying, I was with you. Though you felt abandoned, I was with you.